Hello again, thanks for joining me. I want to talk today about the tools that we have for writing, and you've probably guessed that to be a good writer you do need to be willing to read quite a lot of books. Now, those don't have to just be a standard type of book. They could be plays, they could be factual books. They're not necessarily going to need to be fiction, but it rather depends what you want to write as to what you use to keep you informed of what would be good to have in your vocabulary. So let me just show you a few things that I've gathered here. Now, these first two are what I'd call adult books, really. They're novels. They're written to take people into an experience of what their life is like, and they're based in an autobiographical way on what happened in a person's life, or maybe they've put a bit of fiction into that as well. And turned that into their story. Looking at a much younger audience, you might have come across the St. Clair series of Enid Blyton, or perhaps the Animal Ark stories. I actually wrote a script for one of these once, although it wasn't accepted, and you might think, well, how did you do that? Because Lucy Daniels writes them all. Actually, lots of authors write these books, you'd be interested to know, and you have to create the voice that sounds like Lucy Daniels. So I actually couldn't manage that when I tried, but that's how these books have created such a large and enjoyable series, but they are actually written by other people. Then we've got books which are more traditional children's writing, like The Indian in the Cupboard by Lynn Reid Banks, and Laura Ingalls Wilder. Again, that's autobiographical, but it's much more historical. It was set in a different period altogether in America. And this obviously is a fantasy book about an Indian, a toy Indian who comes alive. So a little bit like a precursor to Toy Story. And depending on what you're going to look at in the books that you read, that will give you, as I say, vocabulary and words that you can use in your own stories. It might give you ideas, but we're going to talk about ideas on another day from now. Many of you will be familiar with Roald Dahl, and he's had quite a comeback because Quentin Blake has been used as the illustrator to bring his work back to life for a modern day audience. But actually his stories were written in the 1960s, 70s, and even 80s, and so it's great that we have access to those very, very readily now. And in here you'll get a whole lot of different quirky vocabulary, because he makes words up, doesn't he? In the BFG he talks about snodcumbers instead of cucumbers, and all kinds of made up imaginary words. And he also has a massive fixation for sweets, if you've noticed, so hence the Chocolate Factory, but you see it in some of the other stories as well. The person who wrote this, Martin Handford, clearly is a lot more interested in illustration than writing, so that just explains something I said yesterday. Now, the other types of books you'll recognise: Beatrix Potter. She's a famous writer, writing about animals but creating characters out of those animals, which has been a very popular thing to do in writing ever since. We talked about The Lord of the Rings yesterday, fantasy genre, looking at creating a whole new world that doesn't exist, and that will give you all sorts of vocabulary in different areas for fantasy types of novels, as may Harry Potter, but I think you'll find that this is extremely descriptive. Charlie Small we talked about yesterday. Lots of action, cowboys, but a lot of humour in there as well, a bit like the Jeremy Strong series on the far end of humour. So if you're looking to write in a humorous way, you need to be reading them. And Diary of a Wimpy Kid as well. Those will all give you humorous angles to borrow. You can't copy what somebody else has written, but you can begin to borrow the techniques that they use and then start to introduce them into your own writing. Stormbreaker, this is the action-packed spy series based on Alex Rider and his adventures, so it's kind of connected to real life, but we know that it's pure fiction as well, and that gives us quite an action-packed, thrilling type of narrative, so we can pick up words that are really going to make our own writing more action-packed and it will also give you ideas for how to structure something so that you've got a nice sweep of introduction of characters before something happens to them, and there's a lot of action, focus and alarm and sort of shock moments in a book like this. Going back to the complete works of William Shakespeare, this is fantastic. Once you can get your head around it, you'll think, wow, he had so many words at his disposal. And as you've probably already seen on Horrible Histories, he actually created lots and lots of phrases that we now use in the English language, like as good as gold, and my kingdom for a horse, and all kinds of things that you've heard people say. I've got one or two other books here, but last of all what I want to talk about is finding words yourself. The dictionary is a useful thing to use. This is a very old dictionary that I've just inherited, so I'm going to show you that one. And the Thesaurus. Now this is a really useful book because if you have a word in your head but it's not a really great word, like interesting or nice or really, something like those words, you can look in here and find an alternative that you much prefer and that makes your writing sound much, much better.